economy globally. When Nigeria's headline inflation eased to 32.15% in August 2024, down from 33.4% recorded in July 2024. This is reflecting a decrease of 1.25 percentage points, the second consecutive monthly slowdown after easing in the previous month. The slowdown will provide some ease to Nigerians who have endured high living costs, while on a year-on-year basis, the headline inflation rate was 6.35 percentage points, higher compared to 25.80% recorded in August 2023. Month-on-month basis, the headline rate declined by 0.06% recorded in August 2024. Let's get talking around this development. And I have with me the Chief Executive Officer and the founder, Cowrie Assets Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. Good afternoon. It's good to see you, Mr. Chukwu. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tolu, for having me. Good afternoon.
Well, I would say that this is the second time we are seeing this decline. You know that. But let's look at the fundamentals. We also saw trade figures looking pretty well. GDP figures came in some time too. And of course, analysts say it's looking pretty good. How would you react to some of these figures that we see, starting with inflation that came up yesterday?
So my first reaction when I saw the inflation figure, I had actually predicted that we were going to see a further moderation in inflation for the month of August. And I wasn't wrong when the figure came out, because you have to recognize the structure of the economy. More than 50% of the consumer price basket is food. And if you look at food inflation, we saw that food inflation dropped materially. Food inflation in July was 39.53%. It dropped to 37.52%. That was a consistent drop, because previously, in the month of June, food inflation was about 40.88%. So that consistent drop is what drove inflation down from 33.4% to 32.15%. Because if you look at core inflation, which is all item inflation excluding volatile agricultural items and energy, it actually increased from 37.65% to 36.76% between the month of June and between the month of July and August. So if core inflation increased and you saw a material decline in all item inflation, then you can attribute it to food inflation. Because food inflation, like I said, dropped from 39.53% in July to 37.52% in August. So that's what drove inflation. And why was I sure that we're going to see a decline in inflation? Because when the harvest season, the major drop we saw in food inflation is coming from food crop, which is the basic food that we produce here. So we saw a material increase in food. Normally during the harvest season, you see a lot of food that is produced coming to the market. And because the farmers do not have storage capacity, what they do is that it becomes a buyer's market ordinarily. We should actually see a more significant drop in food prices, assuming food production was going on in all parts of the country. But because of the insecurity we have today, food production is not it's optimal. So it's not strange, it's not unexpected that inflation dropped in most of July, August. But bear in mind that that drop was driven solely by decline in food prices. Not that food prices decrease, let me put in context, by reduction in the rate of increase in food prices. Because when you talk inflation, measuring increase over the previous year's base. So what we saw was the rate at which food prices increased between August last year and August this year is lower than the rate at which it increased between August 2022 and August 2023.
But if we are to look at the impact of policies that we've been talking about for months now, liberalization of the foreign exchange market and the almighty subsidy or under recovery that we say is on one side now, and we see the implications. Some say that we should expect the impact of the hike in the price of PMS on inflation figures moving forward. Can you make us understand this?
Yes, that's most expected. We should expect that core inflation will increase further when we get to the month of September. But bear in mind that because of the lag effect and the period at which data is collected by the Bureau of Statistics, they would have excluded the period when we have that jump in pump price of fuel. Remember, the figure would have been maybe between July 15th or July 16th to August 15th. So subsequently, the data for September inflation figure will obviously include the sharp increase we see in pump price of fuel and the effect of that increase in pump price on transport costs as well as on commodities. But bear in mind that the structure of measuring the consumer price index, the weight of transport costs is not as steep as the weight of food. So in as much as you're going to see a material increase in transport costs, a material increase in pump price energy costs, the impact in overall weight of the consumer basket may not be as steep as people will expect, because people are going to expect that when you look at the inflation figure in September, you're going to see a sharp jump. You're not going to see a sharp jump because the weight of these items that are directly impacted by the change in price of fuel is not as strong as the weight of food in the basket in consumer price index.
This energy cost that we've talked on, you know, it's really topical, and I'd like us to stay a bit before we now go back to, of course, inflation and its fundamentals. Now, we have talked about this on this program many times, that local refining is the way to go. But Nigerians have gone online everywhere now, and it seems like, no, it's not looking that way, looking at what we currently see as our landing cost. What do you think? What were you also expecting? Did you think that there was going to be something with regards price? And for me, I think someone needs to come up to let us understand if we still have the under recovery or not.
Well, let me start from the tail end of your question, whether we still have under recovery or not. If you look at the template that were published by the Nigerian NNPCL Limited, clearly there's no under recovery because there's a provision for 52 kobo per liter for fuel based on Plat at $690 per barrel per metric ton. There is a provision of $46 premium on each metric ton of PMS, which gave about 50 kobo. So if you look at everything they have arrived at, you end up with a price, the cost of 898 naira. And when they factor in all their costs, they came to about 950 naira. So clearly, there is no window that if fuel is sold in Lagos at 950 naira, based on the price they bought, because remember that Plat is a moving target, it would have changed by now because we know crude price has recovered slightly. So, but if you look at, if they are marketing to market and they are changing their pump price based on Plat and the logistic cost of taking the product to the pump heads or filling stations, then we won't be talking about under recovery, unless there are other factors that have to come into play. But really, based on the template we all saw yesterday, there is a full cost recovery. And like they quoted the Petroleum Industry Act, that's going to be willing buyer, willing seller, and the market is supposed to be reflective of all costs. So I think that's on that. But when the earlier part of your question, the other part of your question is when people are saying that imported fuel is now cheaper. I do not think so, provided the pricing of Dangote fuel is based on Plat and premium. If it's going to be cheaper, then it simply means that the premium of $46 per metric ton is high. I wouldn't know how much premium other international marketing companies like Vitol, BP, Trafigura, and what have you are marking up their metric ton, their Plat price. Normally, there's also a markup. I know it could range between $20 and $30, but what we saw from the template is $46. So the debate would be what premium is Dangote going to add on its product is selling to NNPC or selling to Nigerian importers or consumers, and what premium will other international oil marketing companies add to the Plat price. So that's the key thing, because Plat is an international price which is open to everybody's knowledge and is not hidden. So it's all about what is the trader's margin that will determine whether imported fuel will be cheaper than Dangote refined fuel.
Now, let's look at the impact of this price of PMS. Of course, diesel has also been deregulated on the movement of foodstuff from rural to urban areas. I'm looking at what the implication of what this would be and how that will impact us at the end of the day. On the other side of my question again, is a two-in-one question again. We are yet to see states implement the new minimum wage. How do we balance all of this up?
Well, like I said earlier, any increase in the pump price will have a detrimental effect on the standard of on the price levels across different commodities, including food items. The only difference is that it may not be as steep when they measure it by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. Remember that you need the price of transport costs have all gone up across the country. Even the intra-city movement have all gone up. If you have to take a cab or whatever means of transportation you have to use that is fuel by fuel, then you would have started paying a higher rate. So, and for traders and farmers and those who are going to bring the farm produce from the rural areas to the urban areas, they have to cover their costs of transporting to those rural areas and bringing the goods to the cities. So that will be factored into the cost of whatever is sold in the urban area. So you're going to see a further disparity between rural inflation and urban inflation. But if you look at the weight, which weighs almost equally, so you're going to certainly see an uptick in inflation across the board, both food items, because the cost of transport will factor in the food items, then the traders will also factor in other costs. So clearly, you are going to see a pass-through effect of this increase in fuel prices on virtually all commodities that we consume, including commuting around. So in effect, as it relates to the impact on an average worker like you and I, when there is no increase in our minimum wage. So clearly, when your cost of living increases and you other have a commensurate increase in your income, certainly your standard of living will deteriorate or decline. So we should expect that an average Nigerian household's standard of living will deteriorate further because their cost of living will go up without the commensurate increase in their income, which is the challenge we have that most of the states have not implemented a minimum wage. I'm not even sure if any state has fully implemented other than those states, which they did before the new minimum wage was set. So if you don't have that implementation and you have to use the same amount of income you are earning to buy goods and services whose prices have gone up, certainly you can't afford the same quantity of goods and services you used to buy, which means you may not be able to sustain your previous consumption level for you and your family. And that simply means that your standard of living will deteriorate. If you used to do 111, you may move to 101. If you're doing a 101, I'm talking of staggering your daily feeding, you may go to 001. So that's what some families, or most families in Nigeria, may have to endure as it stands.
Interventions are key here. Mr. Johnson, I know we've gone this route before, but I'd like us to state what sort of interventions we should be looking at. Social safety nets, giving handouts and all of that. Some analysts have said, no, that's not the way to go. What sort of comprehensive intervention are you looking at? There is no time we can't get it right with intervention. So what are you thinking? What's running through your mind? For me, I believe that there should be a synergy, let me use that word, between all arms of government so that this trickles down. What sort of interventions running through your mind, Mr. Chukwu?
Okay, let's start from the basics. The government has passed a new bill on minimum wage. Let the presidency or whoever has authority immediately instruct all arms of government, all agencies, all employers of labor to implement. That's a starting point. And then related to the minimum wage should also be that government at different levels should be able to do some adjustments to the income of their employees, whether it's going to be cost of living allowance that we grant to them or a broad increase, a general increase in salaries and wages. But there has to be some level of direct income improvement of those who are in public service, because when you pay them they are going to also transfer the payment to consume, which will help those who are in private sector employment to also survive. Then the second aspect is that the government needs to develop a reliable poverty register, that the people at the wrong of the ladder, they should be aware of intervening in their lives. I think handouts like giving people rice, which they will finish in a few days. In fact, the rice thing never worked because clearly there was an arbitrage in the distribution of the rice, that those who got it had to sell it at a higher price, which I had actually said at one forum that will happen. But let's even focus on the fundamental issue beyond the handouts. We need to improve on the security situation in the country, which is at the footstep of the government to improve security situation around the country so that food production will go back to what it used to be. So look, this country, we used to feed ourselves. 10 years ago, we were never talking of food insecurity. It's just a new thing in our lexicon because we have allowed insecurity to permeate every facet of our country, and then we really have the bullshit be producing food, living in internally displaced persons camps. So we need to address that. So restore food production to a previous level. Remember, our food production is largely subsistence farming. So if you are dealing with subsistence farming in an economy where people are not able to go to farm, you are certainly going to see a material decline in food production. That's one aspect. The second aspect is that we need to address the issue of crude production by stabilizing the situation we have in the Niger Delta regions, eliminating or reducing to the barest minimum breach of pipelines, so that crude production will help us generate further increase in our foreign exchange earnings, and an improvement in foreign exchange earning will help us stabilize the exchange rate and possibly see Naira appreciate. If Naira appreciates, core inflation will come down and standard of living of Nigerians will improve.
Before I let you go, Mr. Johnson, because this is really getting interesting, I must say. The next NPC meeting, we know that figures from inflation and all of these figures we've talked about will shape the decision. Well, what do you think would happen at that next meeting? Let's do a bit of projection as we expect the meeting, I think sometime in a week or two.
Well, I think the NPC will ordinarily want to keep rates at current levels. We've seen over 800 basis point increase in interest rates. He has not been able to fight the twin challenge of exchange rate depreciation and inflation. But you have to look at the balancing act. And one is that if you consider the fact that inflation had moderated for two consecutive months, down from 34.19% in June to 33.4% in July, and now 32.15% in August. We also seen food inflation drop from 40.87% in June down to 39.53% in July and 37.52% in August. So we've seen a consistent drop, though that will reverse in September. Two, in terms of GDP growth rate, the GDP growth at 3.19% we saw in second quarter, we see it's still quite low for an economy with a population growth rate of about 2.4%, and where you have this level of unemployment. And then the third factor that drives the decision of MPC is exchange rates. We're still dealing with exchange rate pressures. So, if you are dealing with exchange rate pressure and we are dealing with the likely reversal of inflation from a decline to an uptick, the rational thing is to tighten. But can you tighten in an environment where you have high level of unemployment and also where you have a relatively weak GDP growth rate? Secondly, bear in mind that the pressures we're having on inflation is not what you call demand pull inflation, it's cost push. And if it's not demand pull, tightening liquidity would not take away the demand, because people are not, the demand is not even there. Demand has actually collapsed. Look at the trade figures for Q2 2024, published by MBS. If you look at the GDP trade figures, the trade sector only grew by 0.7%, which is almost a 0% growth, which means that in terms of demand in the country has actually become very weak.
I must thank you so much for your time, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, founder, CEO, Carrier Assets Management Limited. Thank you for your insights, as usual. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Well, coming up next on the show, we shift our focus to the crypto market. Yes, you want to hear what's happening? The Securities and Exchange Commission has vowed to maintain standards and regulations in this very industry. Senator Iheye is the lead partner of Infusion Lawyers. He's live in the studio. And after this break, we'll get to this conversation. This is Business Nigeria with Tolulope Ogunjobi.